Silent Wake. Briar Vex had always searched for lost histories, but she never expected history to search for her. The moment she stepped into the ruined court, the torches roared to life. The carvings along the walls twisted into her name. And then he stepped from the shadows golden-eyed, unreadable, his presence suffocating. "You should not have come here," he murmured, "because now the past will not let you go." Chapter 1. The Whispers of Eventide Manor. The late afternoon sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the overgrown drive leading to Eventide Manor. Briar Vex, her silver hair pulled back in a loose braid that threatened to unravel with every gust of wind, felt a familiar prickle of unease crawl across her skin. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More a premonition. A sense of stepping into a story already half-written, a story she wasn't sure she wanted to read. Eventide Manor had belonged to her great Aunt Isolde, a woman Briar had never met, a woman shrouded in family whispers and hushed tones. Isolde the eccentric. Isolde the recluse. Isolde the witch. Briar had always dismissed the last bit as superstitious nonsense, the product of small-town minds and long memories. Still, the air around Eventide felt different. Thick. Heavy. Charged with something she couldn't name. She pushed open the wrought iron gate, its hinges groaning in protest, a sound that echoed unnaturally loud in the stillness. The garden, once meticulously manicured if the faded photographs in Isolde's letters were anything to go by, was now a riot of untamed wilderness. Roses, their blooms a bruised purple, clawed at the stone walls, their thorns gleaming like tiny daggers. Briar felt a pang of regret, a sense of something beautiful lost to neglect. It mirrored the feeling she'd carried within her since her husband, Thomas, had passed 2 years ago. A quiet, persistent ache of something precious withered and gone. The house itself was a Gothic monstrosity, all sharp angles and looming gables. Ivy clung to the gray stone like grasping fingers, obscuring the windows and lending the place an air of perpetual twilight. Briar fished the heavy, antique key from her pocket, its intricate carvings cold against her palm. It was the only thing Isolde had left her, besides the house itself. A key and a cryptic note. Eventide holds the answers you seek. But be warned, Briar, some doors are best left unopened. Briar had scoffed at the melodrama at the time. She was a historian, a woman of logic and reason. She sought answers in dusty archives and forgotten texts, not in crumbling old houses filled with superstitious whispers. But Isolde's death, sudden and unexplained, had left a void. A question mark where a life should have been. And Eventide, despite its unsettling aura, felt like the only place she might find some semblance of closure. The key turned in the lock with a resounding click, the sound echoing through the silent house. Briar pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped inside. The air within was cool and still, carrying the scent of dust and decay, overlaid with a faint, almost imperceptible fragrance of wood smoke and something wilder. Something akin to the scent of a forest after a rainstorm. The entrance hall was vast and shadowy, dominated by a sweeping staircase that disappeared into the gloom above. Faded portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring down at her with eyes that seemed to follow her every move. Briar ran a hand along the smooth, cool surface of a mahogany table, its surface thick with dust. A layer of grime coated everything, a testament to years of solitude and neglect. She felt a surge of sympathy for Isolde, a woman who had lived and died alone in this mausoleum of memories. A sudden sound, a faint scraping from upstairs, made Briar jump. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She strained her ears, listening intently. Silence. Just the creaking of the old house settling around her. Probably just the wind, she told herself, though she hadn't felt a breeze since entering the grounds. She began to explore, her footsteps echoing on the polished wooden floors. The drawing room was filled with antique furniture draped in dust sheets, giving the room a ghostly, ethereal quality. A grand piano stood silent in the corner, its keys yellowed with age. Briar imagined Isolde playing, her fingers dancing across the ivory, filling the house with music that chased away the shadows. In the library, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, crammed with leather-bound volumes. Briar, a lover of books since childhood, felt a thrill of excitement. This was where she would start. This was where she would find the answers she sought. She spent the next few hours lost in the library, pulling books from the shelves, carefully wiping away the dust, and scanning their contents. Most were standard fare: poetry, philosophy, history. But some were different. Books on herbalism, filled with detailed drawings of plants and their properties. Books on ancient rituals and forgotten languages. Books on werewolves. Briar frowned, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. She dismissed the family whispers about Isolde's eccentricities, but these were something else. They spoke of a world beyond the mundane, a world of magic and myth, a world where the line between reality and fantasy blurred. One book, bound in dark, almost black leather, caught her attention. It had no title, no author. Just a single, silver symbol embossed on the cover, a crescent moon entwined with a wolf's head. Briar hesitated, a strange sense of foreboding washing over her. She remembered Isolde's warning. Some doors are best left unopened. But the historian in her, the woman who craved knowledge and understanding, couldn't resist. She carefully opened the book, her fingers trembling slightly. The pages were filled with elegant, spidery script, written in a language she didn't recognize. But as she stared at the words, they seemed to shift, to rearrange themselves, to become English. The first page read, "The Hollow Prince. Bound by sorrow, fueled by rage. He waits in the shadows, his heart a void, his soul tethered to the one who can break the curse. But beware, for the path to his redemption is paved with danger, and the price of his freedom may be more than she is willing to pay." Briar felt a chill run down her spine. The words resonated with a strange, unsettling power. She had the distinct feeling that she was reading something she shouldn't, something that was meant to remain hidden. She looked for the author, the scribe. Any name to connect, but there was nothing but a date at the last page. 1723, so old. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing the single lamp she had lit. Briar gasped, plunging the library into darkness. She fumbled for her phone, her heart pounding in her chest. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the room with a weak, bluish glow. And then she saw it. A shadow. Standing at the far end of the library, near the French doors that led out to the garden. A tall, dark figure, its features obscured by the gloom. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, watching her. Briar's breath caught. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the old manor, of her lungs. She couldn't scream, could barely think. Her phone slipped, falling onto the floor, and for a moment, all was complete darkness. Then, the moon peeked out from behind a cloud, shining its light through the windows. The figure was gone. Briar scrambled for her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She shone the light around the room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Empty. She was alone. But the feeling of being watched, the sense of unease, remained, stronger than ever. And as she stared at the French doors, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A single, perfect, crimson rose lay on the floor, just inside the doors. A rose that hadn't been there before. A rose the color of blood. Chapter 2. The unveiling of the ruined court. The crimson rose lay on the polished floorboards, an unsettling splash of color against the aged wood. Briar stared at it, her mind struggling to reconcile what she'd seen or thought she'd seen with any semblance of rational explanation. The shadow, the rose, were they products of her overactive imagination, fueled by grief and the eerie atmosphere of Eventide Manor? Or was there something more, something otherworldly at play? She forced herself to breathe, to regain some semblance of control. She was a historian, a scholar. She dealt in facts, not fantasies. And yet, the unsettling feeling persisted, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She picked up the rose, its velvety petals surprisingly soft against her fingertips. The scent was intoxicating, a heady blend of sweetness and something darker, something primal. It reminded her of the scent she'd noticed upon entering the house, wood smoke and the wildness of a rain-soaked forest. Briar examined the rose closely. It was flawless, perfectly formed, as if it had been plucked from a greenhouse just moments ago. But there were no greenhouses at eventide, only the overgrown wilderness of the neglected garden. And the thorns, they were unusually sharp, almost black in color. She carefully placed the rose on a nearby table, her gaze drawn back to the book she'd been reading, the one with the cryptic inscription about the Hollow Prince. The one that had seemingly translated itself before her eyes. Logic told her to close the book, to put it away, to forget she'd ever seen it. But curiosity, that insatiable hunger for knowledge that had driven her entire career, gnawed at her. She had to know more. She opened the book again, her fingers tracing the strange, shifting script. The words, once again, rearranged themselves into English, revealing another passage. He is bound to the ruined court, a place of shadows and whispers, where the veil between worlds is thin. To find him, you must follow the path of the silver moonlight, through the whispering woods, to the place where the ancient stones stand sentinel. But be warned, the court is guarded by secrets, and the prince, he is not what he seems. The ruined court, the whispering woods, the ancient stones. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, a gothic romance novel. And yet the words resonated with a strange familiarity, as if she'd heard them before, in a dream, perhaps, or a half-forgotten memory. Briar glanced out the window. The moon, now fully emerged from behind the clouds, bathed the garden in a silvery glow. She could see a faint path leading away from the house, disappearing into the dense thicket of trees that Isolde's letters had referred to as the Whispering Woods. A sudden impulse, stronger than any she'd ever experienced, seized her. She had to go. She had to see this ruined court. She had to find out if the words in the book were true. Ignoring the voice of reason that screamed at her to stay inside, to lock the doors, to call someone, anyone, Briar grabbed a heavy, antique candlestick from the mantelpiece, lit it with a shaky hand, and headed out into the night. The air outside was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The moon cast long, dancing shadows across the overgrown path, making the trees seem like grotesque, animated figures. The wind rustled through the leaves, creating a whispering sound that seemed to murmur her name. Briar followed the path, her heart pounding in her chest, the candlestick casting a flickering circle of light around her. The Whispering Woods lived up to their name. The sounds were everywhere, rustling, clicking, low growls that seemed to come from just beyond the edge of the light. She told herself it was just the wind, just animals, but a primal fear, a sense of being watched, clung to her. After what felt like an eternity, the path opened into a clearing, and there, bathed in the ethereal glow of the moon, stood the ruined court. It wasn't a court in the traditional sense. It was more of a circle of ancient stones, arranged in a precise geometric pattern. Some of the stones had fallen, crumbling into piles of rubble, but others still stood tall, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and shift in the moonlight. In the center of the circle, a raised platform of stone, like an altar, stood bathed in an almost unearthly light. And on the platform, Briar gasped, the candlestick slipping from her grasp and clattering to the ground, plunging her into near darkness. Standing on the platform, silhouetted against the moon, was a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with an aura of power that seemed to radiate outwards, filling the clearing with an almost palpable energy. It was the same figure she'd seen in the library, the shadow that had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow. This time, she could see him. He was dressed in clothes that seemed to belong to another century, a long, dark coat, a high-collared shirt, breeches that disappeared into tall, leather boots. His hair was dark, falling to his shoulders in loose waves. But it was his eyes that captivated her. They glowed with an unnatural, golden light, piercing the darkness like twin flames. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, watching her, his gaze intense and unwavering. Briar felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. He was terrifying, yes, but also beautiful. There was a sadness in his eyes, a haunting quality that drew her in, despite her fear. He took a step forward, and his voice, when he finally spoke, was low and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. "You should not have come here," he murmured, the sound sending shivers down her spine. "Because now, the past will not let you go." His words echoed the inscription in the book, confirming her wildest, most impossible suspicions. This was him, the Hollow Prince. And somehow, she, Briar Vex, the historian, the widow, the woman who had always sought answers in the tangible world, was now inextricably linked to him, to his world, to his curse. Briar was suddenly aware of her name, carved into the very stones on the ground, glowing faintly now with a matching gold of his eyes. Her breath hitched, a sudden, sharp intake, as one of the torches near the standing stones flared with an unnatural light, its flames roaring high into the night sky, as if signaling something. Or someone. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Hollow Prince. The torchlight flared, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist around the ancient stones of the ruined court. Briar stood frozen, her gaze locked on the Hollow Prince, his golden eyes burning into hers. His words, "The past will not let you go," echoed in her mind, a chilling prophecy that seemed to seal her fate. He took another step, closing the distance between them. He moved with a grace that was both unsettling and mesmerizing, like a predator stalking its prey. Briar could smell him now, that same intoxicating scent of wood smoke and wilderness that she'd noticed in the house, only stronger, more intense. It was a scent that bypassed her reason and spoke directly to something primal, something buried deep within her. Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling slightly. She was surprised she could speak at all. Her throat felt tight, constricted by a fear she hadn't known she possessed. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze never leaving hers. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering her question. "You know who I am," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to resonate within the very stones of the court. "The book it told you." Briar swallowed hard. "The book it called you the Hollow Prince." A flicker of something pain crossed his features. "A fitting name," he said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "For a prince with nothing left to rule. A prince hollowed out by sorrow and loss." He looked away, his gaze sweeping across the ruined court, his expression unreadable. This place, it was once a vibrant kingdom, filled with life, with laughter, with love. But it was all taken from me. Briar felt a pang of sympathy for him, despite her fear. There was a deep sadness in his voice, a sense of profound loss that resonated with her own grief. She knew what it was like to lose everything, to have your world shattered in an instant. What happened?" she asked, her voice softer now, the initial terror giving way to a cautious curiosity. He turned back to her, his golden eyes locking onto hers once more. "A curse," he said, the word heavy with centuries of pain. "A curse laid upon me, upon my kingdom, by a vengeful sorceress. A curse that stole my happiness, my future, my very soul." He paused, his gaze intense. "And you, Briarvex," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "are the key to breaking it." Briar's heart skipped a beat. "Me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. How is that possible?" "The book," he said again, gesturing towards the manor with a nod of his head. "It speaks of a soul bond. A connection between two souls, forged across time and space. A bond that can only be broken by the one who shares it. A soul bond." The words sent a shiver down her spine. It sounded like something out of a legend, a myth. And yet, standing here, in this ancient, magical place, with this enigmatic, powerful being, it felt real. "But I don't understand," Briar said, her mind reeling. "I've never met you before. How can we have a soul bond?" He smiled then, a slow, sad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Time is a river, Briar Vex," he said. "It flows in many directions. And sometimes, The currents bring together souls that were destined to meet, even if centuries separate them. He took another step closer, and Briar instinctively recoiled. He stopped, a flicker of hurt in his eyes. "Do not fear me," he said, his voice gentle. "I will not harm you. I need you." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. It was a stark contrast to the aura of power and danger that surrounded him. It made him seem human. Almost. "But the book," Briar said, remembering the warning. "It said the price of your freedom may be more than I am willing to pay." His expression darkened. "There are sacrifices involved," he admitted. "Dangers. The curse, it is not easily broken. There are those who would seek to prevent it, those who would use our bond for their own twisted purposes." "Who?" Briar asked, her fear returning. "Who would want to prevent it?" He hesitated, his gaze shifting towards the whispering woods. "Hunters," he said, the word laced with a mixture of contempt and fear. "Those who hunt my kind. Those who believe we are monsters, creatures to be exterminated." His kind. The realization hit Briar with the force of a physical blow. The book, the whispers, Isolde's eccentricities, it all came together in a terrifying, undeniable truth. He was a werewolf, a creature of myth, of legend, of nightmare. And she, Briar Vex, was somehow bound to him, to his fate, to his curse. He saw the fear in her eyes, the understanding dawning on her face. He took a step back, as if giving her space, giving her a chance to flee. "You can still walk away," he said, his voice low and heavy. "You can go back to your life. Forget you ever saw me. Forget you ever came to Eventide. The past can still release you." The offer was tempting. To return to her quiet, predictable life, to the world of books and history, to the familiar ache of her grief. To escape this terrifying, magical reality that had suddenly been thrust upon her. But there was something that wouldn't let her, the carvings, the book, the feeling of being watched, but something held her back. A sense of obligation. A feeling that she couldn't, in good conscience, abandon him to his fate. And perhaps a flicker of something more, a spark of curiosity, of attraction, of connection. She began, her voice hesitant. "I don't know," before she could finish. A piercing howl shattered the silence of the night, coming from deep within the whispering woods. It was a sound filled with rage and malice, a sound that sent a shiver of pure terror down Briar's spine. The Hollow Prince's eyes widened, his golden glow intensifying. He turned towards the sound, his body tensing, his muscles coiling like a spring. "They're here," he said, his voice grim. "The hunters." He looked down to Briar, a grim, determined fire in his eyes. "They know." Chapter 4. The pact sealed in starlight. The howl echoed again, closer this time, sending a wave of icy dread through Briar. The hunters. They were real. And they were coming for the Hollow Prince. For them. He turned back to Briar, his golden eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. "You have a choice to make, Briar Vex," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Stay and face the danger with me. Or leave and try to forget this ever happened. But know this. If you stay, there is no turning back. The bond between us, it will be sealed." Briar's mind raced. Her instinct screamed at her to run, to escape this terrifying situation. But something held her rooted to the spot. The look in the prince's eyes, a mixture of desperation and hope. The feeling of connection, of obligation, that she couldn't ignore. The undeniable pull of the unknown, of the magical world that had suddenly opened up before her. And, she had to admit, a flicker of something more, a spark of attraction to this enigmatic, dangerous creature. A feeling that, despite her fear, she was drawn to him, to his power, to his vulnerability. What would staying entail?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He extended his hand towards her, his palm open in invitation. "It means trusting me," he said. "It means facing the dangers together. It means fighting for a future that may never come. It means accepting the bond between us, for better or for worse." His hand was large and strong, his skin surprisingly warm to the touch. She hesitated, her gaze flickering from his hand to his eyes, searching for any sign of deception, of malice. But all she saw was sincerity, a desperate plea for help. Another howl, even closer now, spurred her decision. She couldn't leave him to face the hunters alone. She couldn't abandon him to his fate. She wanted to help him. With a deep breath, she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of energy surged through her, like a lightning strike. It was a feeling unlike anything she'd ever experienced, a sensation of warmth, of power, of connection. She gasped, her eyes widening in surprise. The Hollow Prince's eyes flared, his golden glow intensifying. He closed his hand around hers, his grip firm but gentle. "The bond is forged," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "We are now connected, Briarvex. Our fates intertwined." The feeling intensified, a warmth spreading through her chest, settling in her heart. It was a strange, unsettling feeling, but also comforting. A sense of belonging, of purpose, that she hadn't realized she'd been missing. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked. "There is no going back now. You are bound to me, to my curse, to my fate." Briar nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She did understand. And, despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, she wasn't afraid. "Not anymore." "I understand," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a newfound determination. "And I accept." He smiled then, a genuine smile that lit up his features, transforming him from a creature of shadows into something breathtakingly beautiful. It was a smile that reached his eyes, chasing away the sadness, the haunting quality that had lingered there before. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have given me hope. Something I thought I had lost forever." The moment was broken by another howl, this one so close it seemed to be right on top of them. The torches around the ruined court flickered violently, threatening to extinguish. The Hollow Prince released her hand, his expression turning grim. "They're here," he said. "We need to go." He turned and started to run towards the edge of the clearing, towards a narrow path that led back into the Whispering Woods. Briar hesitated for a moment, her gaze drawn back to the manor, to the relative safety of its walls. But the thought of facing the hunters alone, of abandoning the prince to his fate, was unbearable. She took a deep breath and followed him, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. The forest was alive with sounds now, the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, the low growls of unseen creatures. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, overlaid with the acrid tang of fear. As they ran, the Hollow Prince glanced back at her, his expression concerned. "Can you keep up?" he asked. Briar nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She wasn't used to running, especially not through a dark, treacherous forest. But the adrenaline coursing through her veins gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. They ran in silence for several minutes, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. Briar could hear the heavy footfalls of the hunters, the baying of their hounds, the snapping of branches as they crashed through the undergrowth. Suddenly, the Hollow Prince stopped, holding up his hand to signal her to do the same. He listened intently, his head cocked to one side, his golden eyes scanning the darkness. "They're close," he whispered. "Very close. We need to find somewhere to hide." He led her off the path, deeper into the woods, towards a dense thicket of trees. He pushed aside the branches, revealing a small, hidden cave, barely large enough for the two of them. "In here," he said, urging her inside. "Quickly." Briar crawled into the cave, her heart pounding in her chest. The prince followed, pulling the branches back into place, concealing the entrance. They were plunged into darkness, the only sound the ragged breathing of the two of them and the distant, terrifying howls of the hunters and their hounds. Briar could feel the prince's body close to hers, his warmth a comforting presence in the cold, damp cave. He reached out and took her hand, his grip tight and reassuring. "Don't worry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I won't let them harm you." His words, his touch, his presence, gave her a sense of security, a feeling that, Despite the danger, she was safe. She was with him. And somehow, that made all the difference. The sounds were closer still. A man shouted. "This way." "I can smell it." Briar closed her eyes, waiting. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Forgotten Kingdom. The hunters' shouts echoed through the woods, their proximity sending shivers of dread down Briar's spine. Inside the cramped cave, the darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. She could feel the hollow prince's tense body next to hers, his hand still gripping hers tightly, a lifeline in the suffocating darkness. His ragged breathing mirrored her own, a silent testament to the shared fear that pulsed between them. The sounds outside grew louder, the snapping of twigs, the heavy thud of boots on the forest floor, the excited baying of hounds. Briar held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could smell the hunters, a pungent mix of sweat, leather, and something metallic, the scent of weapons. "They're right outside," the prince whispered, his voice barely audible, his breath warm against her ear. "Don't make a sound." Briar nodded, her body rigid with tension. She squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement, a silent promise. The hunters passed by the cave entrance, their voices so close that Briar could almost make out their words. She heard the snuffling of the hounds, their claws scraping against the rocks outside. It felt like an eternity, each second stretching out into an agonizingly long moment. Then, slowly, gradually, the sounds began to fade. The hunters moved on, their voices growing fainter, their footsteps receding into the distance. Briar let out a shaky breath, her body slumping with relief. The prince didn't move, didn't relax his grip on her hand. He remained still, listening intently, his senses on high alert. "They're not gone," he whispered, after several long minutes. "They're circling back. They know we're here somewhere." Briar's heart sank. The brief respite was over. The fear returned, stronger than before, a cold knot in her stomach. What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned to her, his golden eyes piercing the darkness. "We wait," he said. "We wait for an opportunity. And then we run." They waited in silence, the darkness punctuated only by the sounds of the forest and the distant, sporadic shouts of the hunters. Briar found herself strangely comforted by the prince's presence, by the warmth of his hand in hers, by the steady rhythm of his breathing. She found herself studying him, as much as she could in the dim light filtering through the branches concealing the cave entrance. His features were strong and defined, his jawline sharp, his cheekbones high. There was a sadness in his eyes, a weariness that spoke of centuries of suffering. But there was also a strength, a resilience, that captivated her. "Tell me about your kingdom," she whispered, breaking the silence. "The one that was taken from you." He hesitated for a moment, as if reluctant to revisit painful memories. But then, he began to speak, his voice low and resonant, filling the small space with the echoes of a forgotten past. "It was called Eldoria," he said, "a land of rolling hills and verdant forests, of sparkling rivers and towering mountains. A land of magic and wonder, where humans and werewolves lived in harmony." He paused, his gaze drifting towards the cave entrance, as if he could see the images of his lost kingdom in the darkness. "We were not monsters," he said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. "We were protectors, guardians of the land. We lived by a code, a set of ancient laws that governed our interactions with humans, that ensured peace and balance." He described a society that was both sophisticated and primal, a world where magic was woven into the fabric of everyday life, where werewolves shifted forms under the light of the full moon, where the bond between humans and nature was sacred. He spoke of his family, his parents, the wise and benevolent rulers of Eldoria. He spoke of his childhood, filled with laughter and joy, with training in the ways of his people, with the anticipation of one day taking his place as their leader. He spoke of her, Lyra. His voice softened, a tenderness creeping into his tone as he spoke of the woman he had loved, the woman who had been destined to be his queen. "She was everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. beautiful, kind, strong. She was the light of my life, the anchor of my soul. Briar felt a pang of something. Jealousy? Pity? She wasn't sure. But she listened intently, captivated by his story, by the depth of his love for this woman he had lost. The curse, he continued, his voice hardening, the tenderness replaced by a raw, burning anger. It took her from me. It took everything from me. He described the night the curse had been laid upon them, the night the sorceress, driven by a twisted desire for revenge, had unleashed her dark magic upon Eldoria. He spoke of the chaos, the destruction, the screams of his people as they were slaughtered or transformed into mindless beasts. He spoke of Lyra's death, her body broken and lifeless in his arms. Briar listened, her heart aching for him, her eyes filling with tears. She could feel his pain, his grief, his rage, as if it were her own. The soul bond, she realized, was more than just a connection. It was a sharing of emotions, a merging of souls. I tried to fight, he said, his voice choked with emotion. I tried to save them, but it was too late. The curse was too strong. And I was left with nothing. Nothing but sorrow and a burning desire for vengeance. He fell silent, his body trembling with the force of his emotions. Briar reached out and touched his arm, a gesture of comfort, of solidarity. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I can't imagine what you've been through. He turned to her, his golden eyes searching hers. You can, he said. You lost your husband. You know the pain of loss, the emptiness that it leaves behind. Briar nodded, her own grief surfacing, mingling with his. She had lost Thomas to illness, a slow, agonizing decline that had left her feeling helpless and broken. She understood his pain, his sense of loss, all too well. But you're still here, he said, his voice gentle. And you're strong. Stronger than you know. He smiled faintly. The way you faced those hunters. He paused, a sudden thought striking him. A distant shout cut through the night, followed by the baying of hounds, closer than before. The prince stiffened. They've found our scent again, he said, his voice urgent. We need to move. Now. He looked down to Briar, determination written on his face. We are close. Chapter 6. The Huntress and the Haunted. The prince pushed aside the branches concealing the cave entrance, peering out cautiously. The sounds of the hunt were closer, the baying of the hounds a terrifying chorus that echoed through the whispering woods. The moon, partially obscured by clouds, cast long, dancing shadows, making it difficult to see. Stay close to me, he whispered, his hand reaching for Briar's. And be ready to run. Briar nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She gripped his hand tightly, drawing strength from his presence, from the warmth of his touch. They emerged from the cave, moving swiftly and silently through the undergrowth. The prince led the way, his senses on high alert, his eyes scanning the darkness, his ears straining for any sign of the hunters. They moved as one, their bodies in sync, their movements fluid and graceful. Briar found herself surprisingly adept at navigating the treacherous terrain, her fear fueling her agility, her connection to the prince guiding her steps. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a tree, blocking their path. A woman, tall, slender, with long, dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. She was dressed in black leather, similar to the prince's attire, but hers was more functional, more suited for hunting. She held a crossbow in her hands, its arrow pointed directly at the prince's heart. Her eyes, a cold, steely gray, were fixed on him, filled with a mixture of hatred and something else. Something that looked like recognition. Well, she said, her voice low and menacing. Look what we have here. The Hollow Prince. Out for a midnight stroll with his pet? Her gaze shifted to Briar, her eyes narrowing. And who is this? Another one of your victims? Another soul you've ensnared with your dark magic? The prince stepped in front of Briar, shielding her from the woman's gaze, from the deadly arrow. Leave her out of this, Seraphina, he said, his voice cold and hard. This is between you and me. Seraphina. The name resonated with Briar, a faint echo of something she'd read in Isolde's books, in the book about the Hollow Prince. A hunter, a legendary figure, known for her ruthlessness, her skill, her unwavering dedication to eradicating werewolves. "Oh, I think not, Alaric," Seraphina said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Everything you touch is tainted. Everything you love dies." Alaric. So that was his name. The prince's real name. Briar stored the information away, a small piece of the puzzle that was his life, his past. Alaric's body tensed, his muscles coiling like a spring. His golden eyes flared, his grip on Briar's hand tightening. "Don't you dare speak of her," he said, his voice low and dangerous, a growl rumbling in his chest. "Of Lyra?" Seraphina asked, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "The woman you couldn't save? The woman whose death you are responsible for?" Alaric flinched, as if struck by a physical blow. The pain in his eyes was raw, unbearable. Briar felt it too, the wave of grief washing over her, a testament to the strength of their bond. "You know nothing," Alaric said, his voice trembling with rage. "You weren't there. You don't know what happened." "Oh, I know enough," Seraphina said. "I know that you are a monster, a creature of darkness, a blight upon this earth. And I am going to end you." She raised her crossbow, her finger tightening on the trigger. Briar gasped, her body instinctively moving to shield Alaric, to protect him from the deadly arrow. But Alaric was faster. He pushed Briar behind him, turning to face Seraphina, his eyes blazing with defiance. "Do it," he said, his voice cold and steady. "End it, if you can." Seraphina hesitated, her finger wavering on the trigger. Her eyes, for the first time, showed a flicker of doubt, of uncertainty. She began, her voice faltering. Suddenly, a crashing sound from behind them broke the tension. More hunters. They had surrounded them. Seraphina lowered her crossbow, her gaze shifting to the approaching figures. "Take them," she said, her voice regaining its cold, hard edge. "But keep the woman alive. I want to know who she is, what hold he has on her." The hunters, armed with swords, crossbows, and other weapons, closed in, forming a circle around Alaric and Briar. There was no escape. Alaric turned to Briar, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and determination. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I didn't want this for you." Briar shook her head, her eyes locked on his. "It's not your fault," she said. I chose to stay. I chose to be with you." He smiled then, a sad, fleeting smile. "Thank you," he said, for everything." He turned to face the hunters, his body tensing, preparing for a fight he knew he couldn't win. He was outnumbered, outmatched. But he wouldn't go down without a fight. He wouldn't let them harm Briar. As the hunters lunged, Alaric let out a roar, a primal sound that echoed through the forest, a sound that was both terrifying and magnificent. He shifted, his body transforming, his bones cracking, his muscles rippling, his skin sprouting fur. The change was both brutal and swift. He became the wolf. But this was no ordinary wolf. His eyes still held that unsettling, golden light. Briar watched, her heart pounding in her chest, as the Hollow Prince, the man she was now bound to, prepared to fight for his life, for their lives. A battle cry to his left made her aware of the danger she was in. Chapter 7. The Curse of the Crimson Moon. The hunters attacked. Swords clashed against something. Not fur, not quite. Briar couldn't quite comprehend what she was seeing. Alaric, in his wolf form, was more than just a wolf. He was an embodiment of ancient power, of primal fury, of a magic that defied logic and reason. He moved with a speed and agility that was impossible for any natural creature, deflecting blows, dodging arrows, his golden eyes blazing with an unearthly light. But there were too many of them. The hunters, seasoned and skilled, pressed their attack, their weapons finding their mark, drawing blood. Alaric roared in pain, his body flinching, but he fought on, his ferocity undiminished. Briar, despite her fear, found herself moving, acting. She grabbed a fallen branch, its wood surprisingly heavy and solid, and swung it at the nearest hunter, catching him off guard. He stumbled back, cursing, his sword clattering to the ground. She didn't have time to think, to analyze. She acted on instinct, driven by a desperate need to protect Alaric, to protect herself. The bond between them, she realized, was not just a sharing of emotions. It was a sharing of strength, of courage, of something else. Something primal. Something wild. She fought alongside Alaric, her movements surprisingly fluid and coordinated, as if she were drawing on some hidden reserve of strength, some ancient knowledge that had been awakened within her. She was no longer just a historian, a scholar, a widow. She was a warrior, a protector, a woman fighting for her life, for the life of the man she was bound to. But the hunters were relentless. They kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Alaric, despite his power, was weakening. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, his movements slowing, his roars becoming weaker. Serafina, watching from the sidelines, her expression cold and calculating, raised her hand, signaling a halt to the attack. "Enough," she said, her voice ringing out through the clearing. "Bring him down. But don't kill him." "Not yet." The hunters obeyed, their attacks becoming more focused, more coordinated. They used nets, ropes, and other devices to try to ensnare Alaric, to immobilize him. He fought against them, his powerful jaws snapping, his claws tearing at the nets, but it was a losing battle. He was surrounded, overwhelmed. Briar watched in horror as Alaric was finally brought down, his body entangled in nets, his legs bound by ropes. He lay on the ground, panting, bleeding, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of rage and despair. Serafina approached him, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "The mighty Hollow Prince," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Reduced to this. A pathetic, whimpering beast." She turned to Briar, her eyes narrowing.
"And you," she said.
"What are you? Some kind of witch? A sorceress? What spell has he cast upon you?" Briar stood tall, her chin lifted, her gaze unwavering. "I am not under any spell," she said, her voice surprisingly strong and steady. "I am here by choice. I am bound to him. By fate. By something you wouldn't understand." Serafina scoffed. "Fate? Don't be ridiculous. There is no such thing as fate. Only choice. And you have chosen poorly." She turned back to Alaric, her expression hardening. "Take him," she said to the hunters. "To the citadel. It's time he faced justice. It's time he paid for his crimes." The hunters dragged Alaric away, his body limp and unresponsive. Briar tried to follow, but two hunters grabbed her arms, restraining her. "Let me go," she cried, struggling against their grip. "You can't do this. He's done nothing wrong." Serafina ignored her, her gaze fixed on Alaric's retreating form. "Tonight," she said, her voice low and menacing, "is the crimson moon. The night of his curse. The night he loses everything. Again. The crimson moon." The word sent a chill down Briar's spine. She remembered the book, the inscription about the Hollow Prince. Bound by sorrow, fueled by rage, he waits in the shadows, his heart a void, his soul tethered to the one who can break the curse. But what did it mean? What was the curse of the crimson moon? And how could she, Briar Vex, a woman with no magical abilities, possibly break it? The hunters dragged her away, following Alaric towards the citadel, a place she had only read about in legends, a place of darkness and despair, a place where werewolves were imprisoned and executed. As she was dragged along, forced to follow the path slick with Alaric's blood, she caught sight of the moon, hanging low in the sky. It was no longer silver. It was blood red. The sight filled Briar with a sense of dread, of impending doom. But it also filled her with a newfound determination. She had to save Alaric. She had to break the curse. She had to find a way. She had to get to him before whatever the crimson moon brought with it took him completely. Chapter 8. Threads of Fate and Deception. The citadel loomed before Briar, a monstrous edifice of black stone that seemed to claw at the crimson-stained sky. It was a place of stark, Brutal architecture, devoid of any beauty or warmth, a fortress designed to imprison and break the spirits of those held within its walls. The air around it crackled with a dark, oppressive energy, a palpable manifestation of the suffering and despair that permeated its very stones. The hunters dragged Briar through the massive iron gates, their grip tight on her arms, ignoring her struggles and protests. The courtyard was a scene of grim activity, hunters milling about, preparing for something. Torches flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the stone walls, illuminating the faces of the hunters, their expressions hard and unyielding. Briar was shoved into a cold, damp cell, its walls bare stone, its floor covered in straw. The heavy iron door clanged shut, the sound echoing through the silence, a final, resounding declaration of her imprisonment. She sank to the floor, her body exhausted, her mind reeling. She was trapped, alone, in a place of darkness and despair, with no idea what the future held. Alaric was somewhere within these walls, suffering, waiting for what? The curse of the Crimson Moon. What did it entail? What would happen to him? She thought of Alaric, of his golden eyes, of his strength, of his vulnerability. She thought of the bond between them, the connection that had grown stronger with each passing moment, the feeling that their fates were intertwined, that his destiny was now hers. She had to escape. She had to find him. She had to save him. But how? She was just a woman, a historian, with no magical abilities, no fighting skills. She was trapped in a fortress filled with hunters, with people who hated and feared werewolves, with people who wanted Alaric dead. Despair threatened to engulf her, to crush her spirit. But she fought against it, clinging to the memory of Alaric's smile, to the feeling of his hand in hers, to the hope that he had given her. She stood up, her legs shaky, her body aching. She examined the cell, searching for any weakness, any flaw in its construction, any possible means of escape. But there was nothing. The walls were solid stone. The door was heavy iron. The small, barred window high above her reach. She was trapped. Suddenly, a voice, soft and unexpected, broke the silence. Briar? Briar whirled around, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing outside the cell, her face partially obscured by the shadows, was Seraphina. Briar stared at her, her mind struggling to comprehend the unexpected visit. Why was she here? What did she want? What do you want? Briar asked, her voice trembling slightly. Seraphina stepped closer, her gray eyes piercing the darkness. I want to understand, she said. I want to know what hold he has on you. Briar hesitated, unsure whether to trust her. Seraphina was a hunter, Alaric's enemy. And yet there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something other than hatred. Curiosity? Doubt? I told you, Briar said. We are bound. By fate. By something you wouldn't understand. Seraphina scoffed. Fate? Don't be ridiculous. There is no such thing as fate. But her voice lacked its usual conviction. It sounded uncertain. Then explain it, Briar challenged. Explain the connection I feel to him. Explain that the things I've seen, the things I've felt since I came to Eventide. Seraphina was silent for a moment, her gaze searching Briar's face. He's using you, she said finally. He's manipulating you. He's a master of deception, of illusion. He's not what he seems. And what is he? Briar asked. A monster? A creature of darkness? Is that what you believe? Seraphina hesitated. He destroyed my family, she said, her voice thick with emotion. He killed my sister. He took everything from me. Briar felt a pang of sympathy for her. She understood loss. She understood grief. She understood the desire for revenge. I'm sorry, Briar said, for your loss. But I don't believe he's the monster you think he is. I've seen his pain, his sorrow. I've felt his goodness. Seraphina shook her head. You're blinded by his magic, she said. You don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of. And you do? Briar asked. Seraphina was silent again, her gaze drifting towards the ceiling, as if lost in thought. I thought I did, she said finally. But there are things I don't understand. Things that don't make sense. She looked back at Briar, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of confusion and hope. The Crimson Moon, she said. It's a time of great power. A time when the veil between worlds is thin. A time when curses can be broken. Or strengthened. What do you mean? Briar asked, her heart pounding in her chest. The curse on Alaric, Seraphina said. It feeds on his sorrow, on his despair. Every crimson moon, it takes a piece of him. It weakens him. It hollows him out. Seraphina stopped, looked down to the ground. It's what gives him his name. But it can be broken? Briar asked, her voice filled with a desperate hope. Seraphina nodded slowly. That's what the legends say, she said. But it requires a sacrifice. A great sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Briar asked, her voice trembling. Seraphina looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and warning. The sacrifice of a soul, she said. A soul willingly given. A soul. Willingly given. The words echoed in Briar's mind, a chilling prophecy that seemed to seal her fate. She understood now. The price of Alaric's freedom was her. Seraphina seemed to read her thoughts. Don't do it, she said, her voice urgent. Don't let him manipulate you. Don't throw your life away for him. He hasn't done anything. We are connected, a bond, Briar protested. But Seraphina stopped her. I know about the bond, she said. It is why I am telling you. It's an old magic, a lost tie. One only between two of a kind. She paused then. He told you, didn't he? That you were bound. You were the key. Briar stared back, silent. He lied, Seraphina said, her voice filled with a strange mix of sorrow and warning. The bond is there, but it's his to use. He is the key, not you. And he knows it. She paused again, looking back out to the courtyard. It is almost time. Chapter 9. The Library of Lost Souls. Seraphina's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the damp chill of the cell. He lied. The accusation echoed in Briar's mind, a dissonant chord striking against the melody of trust and connection she had felt with Alaric. Could it be true? Had he manipulated her, used her all along? Why are you telling me this? Briar asked, her voice trembling, her mind struggling to reconcile the conflicting emotions that surged within her. Seraphina turned back to her, her gray eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotion, sorrow, regret, and a flicker of something else. Something that looked like compassion. Because I've seen what his curse does, she said, her voice low and strained. I've seen the destruction it wreaks, the lives it ruins. And I don't want to see another soul consumed by it. She paused, her gaze searching Briar's face. I know what it's like to lose everything, she continued. To be driven by grief, by the desire for revenge. But revenge won't bring back the dead. It won't heal the wounds. It will only create more suffering. Briar stared at her, her mind reeling. Seraphina's words resonated with a truth that she couldn't ignore. She, too, knew the pain of loss, the emptiness that it left behind. She, too, had been tempted by the desire for revenge, for some kind of retribution. But she had also felt something else with Alaric. Something that transcended grief and anger. Something that spoke of hope, of connection, of love. Could that all have been a lie? A carefully constructed illusion designed to manipulate her, to use her for his own selfish purposes? I don't know what to believe, Briar said, her voice barely a whisper. Seraphina sighed, a weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. Belief is a dangerous thing, she said. It can blind you to the truth. It can lead you down paths you never intended to follow. She reached into a pocket of her leather tunic and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. She held it out to Briar. This belonged to my sister, she said. She was a scholar. Like you. She studied the ancient lore, the forgotten magic. She believed in the possibility of redemption. Even for werewolves. Briar hesitated, then took the box. It was warm to the touch, its surface smooth and worn. She opened it carefully, revealing a single, rolled-up scroll, tied with a faded ribbon. This scroll, Seraphina said, contains information about the Crimson Moon curse, about its origins, its power, and its weaknesses. It may help you understand. It may help you make a choice. Briar looked at her, her eyes filled with questions. Why are you doing this? She asked. Why are you helping me? Seraphina looked away, her gaze drifting towards the barred window, towards the crimson-stained sky. Because maybe I was wrong, she said softly. Maybe there is still hope. For him. For you. For all of us. She turned back to Briar, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of determination and fear. But be warned, she said. The Citadel is not what it seems. There are secrets within these walls, hidden passages, forgotten chambers. And there are those who would seek to use the curse for their own twisted purposes. Who? Briar asked, her heart pounding in her chest. The Council, Seraphina said, her voice barely a whisper. The ruling body of the hunters. They are not what they appear to be. They are corrupt. They crave power. And they believe that Alaric's curse can be harnessed, controlled, used as a weapon. The Council. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Briar remembered the whispers she'd heard among the hunters, the fear and reverence with which they spoke of the Council. What do I do? Briar asked, her voice filled with a desperate urgency. Find Alaric, Seraphina said. Find him before the Council does. And use the scroll. It may show you the way. She paused, her gaze intense. But be careful, Briar, she said. Trust no one. Except perhaps yourself. With those final words, Seraphina turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Briar alone with the scroll, with the weight of her choices, with the terrifying uncertainty of the future. Briar opened the scroll carefully, her fingers trembling. The script was ancient, elegant, similar to the writing in Isolde's book. But as she stared at the words, they began to shift, to rearrange themselves, to become English. The scroll spoke of a hidden chamber within the Citadel, a place called the Library of Lost Souls. A place where the ancient records of the werewolves were kept, a place where the secrets of the Crimson Moon curse were hidden. It spoke of a ritual that could be used to break the curse. But it also spoke of the sacrifice of a soul, willingly given. The scroll confirmed what Seraphina had said. Alaric had lied. He was the key to breaking the curse, using the ancient soul bond. Not her. But the scroll also revealed something else. Something that Seraphina hadn't mentioned. Something that gave Briar a flicker of hope. The ritual, it said, could be performed in two ways. One way required the sacrifice of a soul. The other required something else. Something far more difficult. It required the merging of two souls. A complete and utter union, a blending of two beings into one. A sacrifice, not of life, but of self. Briar looked up, her eyes meeting her own reflection in a small, dusty mirror on the far wall. It was a risk, a terrifying risk, but it was also a chance. A chance to save Alaric, to save herself, to save everything. She had to find him, and she had to find this library of lost souls. She heard the distant sound of a howl, Alaric's, filled with anguish. Chapter 10. The Price of Forbidden Knowledge. The howl, raw with pain and despair, echoed through the Citadel, spurring Briar to action. She had to find Alaric, and she had to find the Library of Lost Souls. Time was running out. The crimson moon hung heavy in the sky, its malevolent light bathing the world in a bloody glow. She carefully re-rolled the scroll, placing it back in the wooden box, a tangible link to Seraphina's sister, to a past filled with both hope and tragedy. She tucked the box into her pocket, a source of strength and guidance in this terrifying, uncertain situation. She examined the cell again, her eyes scanning the walls, the floor, the ceiling, searching for any clue, any sign of a hidden passage, a secret exit. Seraphina had said that the Citadel was filled with secrets, with hidden chambers. But where to begin? She remembered the words of the scroll, the description of the Library of Lost Souls. It spoke of a place hidden deep within the Citadel, a place protected by ancient magic, a place accessible only to those who knew the way. She closed her eyes, trying to recall any detail, any clue that might help her. She thought of Isolde's letters, of the book about the Hollow Prince, of the conversations she'd had with Alaric. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. A passage from Isolde's book, a cryptic phrase that had seemed meaningless at the time, but now it resonated with a new significance. Where the shadows dance and the stones whisper, seek the eye that sees, but cannot speak. The eye that sees but cannot speak. What did it mean? A statue? A painting? A symbol? Briar opened her eyes, her gaze drawn to the small, barred window high above her reach. The crimson moon shone through the bars, casting long, dancing shadows across the cell floor. Shadows that seemed to whisper. She looked at the shadows, studying their patterns, their movements. And then she saw it. A small, almost imperceptible carving on the wall, just below the window. A carving of an eye. An eye that seemed to follow her gaze. An eye that saw, but could not speak. Briar felt a surge of hope. This was it. This had to be it. But how to reach it? The window was too high, the walls were too smooth to climb. She needed something to stand on, something to give her the extra height she needed. She looked around the cell, her eyes searching for anything that might help. And then she saw it. A loose stone in the floor, near the corner of the cell. She knelt down, her fingers probing the edges of the stone. It was loose, wobbly. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, she managed to pry it free, revealing a small, dark cavity beneath. Inside the cavity, she found nothing. Just dirt and dust. Disappointment washed over her, threatening to extinguish the fragile flame of hope that had been rekindled within her. But then she noticed something. A faint scratching on the underside of the stone. A series of symbols, similar to the ones she'd seen in Isolde's book, on the scroll. She carefully traced the symbols with her finger, her mind racing. They were a sequence. A code. A key. She looked back at the carving of the eye, at the walls surrounding it. And then she understood. The symbols on the stone corresponded to specific points on the wall, points that needed to be pressed in a specific order to unlock something. With trembling fingers, she began to press the points on the wall, following the sequence indicated by the symbols on the stone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She pressed the final point, and a faint click echoed through the cell. A section of the wall, just below the window, slid open, revealing a narrow, dark passage. Briar's heart leaped with excitement. She had done it. She had found a way out. She took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. She had no idea what awaited her on the other side of the passage, but she knew she had to go. She had to find Alaric. She had to find the Library of Lost Souls. She squeezed through the opening, her body brushing against the cold, damp stone. The passage was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for her to crawl through. The air was thick and musty, carrying the scent of dust and decay. She crawled forward, her hands and knees scraping against the rough stone floor. The darkness pressed in on her, suffocating, disorienting. She could hear the faint sounds of the citadel above her, the muffled voices of the hunters, the occasional howl of a distant wolf. After what felt like an eternity, the passage began to widen. She could see a faint light ahead, a flickering glow that beckoned her forward. She reached the end of the passage, emerging into a large, circular chamber. The chamber was lit by a single, flickering torch, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. The air was thick with the scent of old books, of parchment and leather, of magic. She had found it. The Library of Lost Souls. The chamber was filled with bookshelves, floor to ceiling, crammed with ancient tomes, scrolls, and other artifacts. It was a treasure trove of forgotten knowledge, a repository of secrets that had been hidden away for centuries. At the center, a raised pedestal. Briar approached the pedestal, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a sense of awe, of reverence, as she gazed upon this hidden sanctuary of knowledge. This was where the answers lay, the answers to the curse, the answers to Alaric's fate, the answers to everything. She began to search, her eyes scanning the shelves, her fingers tracing the spines of the ancient books. She had to find the information she needed, the information about the ritual, the information about the merging of souls. She found books on werewolves, on their history, their lore, their magic. She found books on curses, on their origins, their power, their weaknesses. She found books on soul bonds, on the ancient connections between beings, on the power of love and sacrifice. She pulled one, the binding of Alaric, and quickly scanned it. It was his history, the truth of his kingdom and his love, Lyra. And it told her something she needed to know about the merging ritual. It had to be done under the full crimson moon. As she read, she became aware of a growing feeling of unease. The knowledge was, in places, horrible. It was a feeling of being watched, of being judged. Suddenly, a voice, cold and menacing, broke the silence. So, the little bird has found her way into the lion's den. Briar froze, a book in her hands. She looked up. The entrance was blocked. Standing before her was a tall, imposing figure, dressed in elaborate robes, his face obscured by a silver mask. The leader of the council. Chapter 11. The Dance of Shadows and Light. The masked figure stepped into the library of lost souls, his presence filling the chamber with a palpable sense of menace. His robes, a deep crimson embroidered with silver thread, shimmered in the flickering torchlight, giving him an almost regal appearance, despite the cold, calculating aura that emanated from him. "I must say, I'm impressed," he said, his voice a smooth, chilling baritone that echoed through the room. "You've managed to find your way into the most secret chamber of the Citadel. A feat that few have accomplished." Briar stood her ground, clutching the book she'd been reading, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew who this was, the leader of the Hunters' Council, the man Seraphina had warned her about, the man who sought to exploit Alaric's curse for his own twisted purposes. "Who are you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. He chuckled, a cold, mirthless sound. "You may call me the Master," he said. "And you, I presume, are the companion of the Hollow Prince." His gaze swept over her, assessing, calculating. "I must admit, I'm intrigued," he continued. "What is it about you that has captivated him so? What power do you possess that has allowed you to infiltrate our ranks?" "I have no power," Briar said. "I am just a woman. A woman who cares about him." The Master scoffed. "Care? Don't be naive. The Hollow Prince is incapable of love, of compassion. He is a creature of darkness, a monster driven by rage and sorrow. He is a weapon. And I intend to wield that weapon." He took a step closer, his masked face looming over her. "You see, my dear," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "the Crimson Moon curse is not just a curse. It is a source of immense power. Power that can be harnessed, controlled, used to reshape the world." Briar's blood ran cold. She understood now. The council didn't want to break the curse. They wanted to exploit it, to use Alaric's suffering, his power, to achieve their own nefarious goals. "You're mad," she said, her voice trembling. "You can't control him. You can't control the curse. It will destroy you." The Master laughed again, a chilling sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Oh, I disagree," he said. "With the proper knowledge, with the proper tools, anything is possible." He gestured towards the bookshelves, towards the ancient tomes that lined the walls. "This library," he said, "contains the secrets of the ages. The knowledge of the werewolves, of their magic, of their power. And within these walls I have found the key to unlocking the full potential of the Crimson Moon curse." He turned back to Briar, his masked face unreadable. "And you, my dear," he said, "are going to help me find it." "I will never help you," Briar said, her voice filled with defiance. "I will never let you use him, exploit him." The Master smiled, a cruel, chilling smile that sent a shiver of dread down her spine. "Oh, I think you will," he said. "You see, I have something you want, something precious to you." He snapped his fingers, and two hunters stepped forward, dragging a limp, bloodied figure between them. "Alaric." Briar gasped, her heart constricting with pain and fear. Alaric was unconscious, his body covered in wounds, his fur matted with blood. He looked broken, defeated. "Let him go," Briar cried, rushing towards him, but the hunters held her back, their grip tight on her arms. The master watched her, his eyes gleaming with amusement behind his mask. "Such devotion," he said. "Such misplaced loyalty. Don't you see, my dear? He is a monster, a creature of darkness. He doesn't deserve your love, your compassion." "He's not a monster," Briar said, her voice choked with emotion. He's a victim of your cruelty, of your ambition." The master ignored her, his gaze fixed on Alaric. "The crimson moon is at its zenith," he said. "The time is ripe. The ritual can begin." He turned to the hunters. "Take him to the chamber," he said. "Prepare him, and bring me the book." He gestured towards a specific shelf, towards a large, leather-bound tome with a silver clasp. The hunters obeyed, dragging Alaric away, leaving Briar alone with the master. What are you going to do?" Briar asked, her voice trembling. The master turned back to her, his masked face unreadable. "I am going to unlock his potential," he said. "I am going to harness his power. I am going to become a god." He approached her, his hand reaching out, his fingers brushing against her cheek. "And you, my dear," he said, his voice a low, seductive whisper, "are going to watch." He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. He pulled her towards him, his body pressing against hers. "It's time," he said, his voice filled with a dark, twisted excitement, "for the dance of shadows and light to begin." He pulled her with him, forcing her to follow, towards another hidden door within the library, one she hadn't noticed before. It led to a deeper darkness. She could hear Alaric, a low, wounded growl. The full moon was directly above now. Chapter 12. The Awakening of Ancient Magic. The master dragged Briar through the hidden passage, the darkness closing in around them, suffocating and disorienting. The air grew heavy, charged with a palpable sense of anticipation, of dread. She could hear Alaric's growls, growing fainter, more desperate, as they moved further away. The passage opened into a large, circular chamber, lit by the eerie, blood-red glow of the crimson moon, which shone directly through a large opening in the ceiling. The chamber was stark and bare, its walls lined with strange symbols and carvings. In the center of the chamber, a stone altar stood bathed in the crimson light, a focal point of power, of ancient magic. Alaric lay on the altar, his body bound by chains, his wolf form flickering unstable, his golden eyes filled with pain and confusion. The two hunters who had dragged him here stood guard, their faces grim, their weapons drawn. The master released Briar, shoving her towards the altar, towards Alaric. "Witness," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Witness the dawn of a new age. Witness the power of the crimson moon." He approached the altar, holding the large, leather-bound book he had taken from the library. He opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with ancient script, with intricate diagrams, with spells. He began to chant, his voice low and resonant, filling the chamber with a dark, unsettling energy. The words were in a language Briar didn't recognize, but she could feel their power, their malevolence. They seemed to vibrate through the very air, through her very bones. As the master chanted, the crimson moon seemed to grow larger, brighter, its light intensifying, bathing the chamber in a bloody glow. The symbols on the walls began to glow, to writhe and shift, as if alive. The air crackled with energy, with a sense of impending something. Alaric struggled against his bonds, his wolf form flickering violently, his howls growing more frantic, more desperate. He looked at Briar, his golden eyes pleading, begging for something. Help, release? Briar felt a surge of something. Not just fear, not just despair, but power. A power she hadn't known she possessed. A power that seemed to be flowing from Alaric, from the bond between them, from the very air around them. She remembered the scroll, the words about the merging of souls, the complete and utter union, the sacrifice of self. She remembered the book in the Library of Lost Souls, the true story of Lyra, of the way to truly channel the curse. She knew what she had to do. She stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Alaric, her heart pounding in her chest.
"Stop,"
she cried, her voice ringing out through the chamber. "Stop this madness." The master ignored her, continuing his chant, his voice growing louder, more intense. The hunters moved to intercept her, but something stopped them. A force field, invisible but palpable, seemed to surround her, protecting her from their reach. Briar approached the altar, her eyes locked on Alaric's. She could feel the power flowing through her, growing stronger with each passing moment. It was a terrifying, exhilarating feeling, a sense of being connected to something ancient, something primal, something divine. She reached out, her hands hovering over Alaric's body. She closed her eyes, focusing all her will, all her energy, all her love on him. She began to chant, not the words of the master's spell, but the words of the ancient ritual, the words from the true history she had read, the words that spoke of the merging of souls, of the complete and utter union. Her voice, at first hesitant and trembling, grew stronger, more confident, resonating with a power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the citadel. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, the air crackled with energy, the crimson moon seemed to pulse, to throb, like a beating heart. The master, startled by her interruption, stopped his chant, his eyes widening behind his mask. What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice filled with rage and confusion. "I'm saving him," Briar said, her voice clear and strong, her eyes still closed, her focus unwavering. "I'm breaking the curse." She continued her chant, her voice rising in power, in intensity. She could feel Alaric's presence, his essence, merging with hers, blending with hers, becoming one. It was a terrifying, exhilarating experience, a sensation of losing herself, of becoming something more. She could feel his pain, his sorrow, his rage, but she could also feel his strength, his courage, his love. The master, realizing what she was doing, rushed towards her, his hands outstretched, his eyes blazing with fury. "Stop her," he screamed to the hunters. "Stop her before it's too late." But the hunters couldn't move. The force field surrounding Briar had grown stronger, impenetrable. They watched in helpless horror as the ritual continued, as the power in the chamber grew, as the crimson moon reached its zenith. Briar felt herself changing. Her body was filled with a warmth, a light, a power that was both terrifying and beautiful. She could feel Alaric's wolf form receding, his human form returning, his wounds healing, his strength returning. She opened her eyes, and they were no longer brown. They were golden. The same golden glow as Alaric's. The same golden glow that was intensifying as the crimson moon above them started to shift its color back to silver. The change was happening.
"Now."
She looked at Alaric, and he looked at her, their eyes locked in a gaze of recognition, of understanding, of love. The master was screaming now, with the hunters trying to restrain him. He broke free and was charging towards the altar.
"No,"
he yelled, "it's mine. The power is mine." It was too late. The connection was complete. Briar and Alaric were one. Chapter 13. The Betrayal Beneath the Boughs. The moment of union was cataclysmic. A wave of pure energy, golden and shimmering, erupted from Briar and Alaric, washing over the chamber, throwing the master and the hunters back against the walls. The crimson moon, now fully returned to its silvery luminescence, seemed to pulse, to throb, in harmony with the newly forged bond. The master, his mask cracked, his robes torn, struggled to his feet, his eyes blazing with fury and disbelief.
"Impossible,"
he screamed, his voice hoarse and ragged. This cannot be. The power, it was mine." He lunged towards Briar and Alaric, his hands outstretched, claws extended, as if he could somehow tear them apart, reclaim the power he believed was rightfully his. But he was too late. The bond was complete. Briar and Alaric were no longer two separate beings, but a single entity, a fusion of human and werewolf, of ancient magic and modern resilience. They rose together, their movements synchronized, their eyes, both golden now, fixed on the master. They radiated power, a sense of unity, of purpose, that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. "You cannot control what you do not understand," Alaric said, his voice resonating with Briar's, a harmonious blend of masculine and feminine tones. The curse was never yours to wield. It was a burden, a tragedy, a consequence of hatred and vengeance. And now, Briar continued, her voice echoing Alaric's, "It is over. The cycle is broken. The power is ours.
To heal.
To protect. To rebuild." The master, his face contorted with rage and madness, charged again, but this time, he was met with a force unlike any he had ever encountered. Briar and Alaric, acting as one, raised their hands, and a wave of golden energy slammed into him, throwing him back against the far wall with bone-crushing force. He slumped to the ground, his body broken, his spirit crushed. He looked up at them, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and defeat. You don't know what you've done," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You've unleashed something far worse than the curse." "We have unleashed hope," Briar said, her voice firm and unwavering. "We have unleashed love. We have unleashed the future." The hunters, witnessing the master's defeat, the overwhelming power of Briar and Alaric, lowered their weapons, their faces pale with fear and uncertainty. They had been loyal to the council, to the master, but now they saw the truth. They had been manipulated, deceived, used for a purpose that was both cruel and insane. Briar and Alaric turned their attention to the hunters, their golden eyes scanning their faces, searching for any sign of continued hostility. But all they saw was fear, and perhaps a flicker of hope. "The reign of the council is over," Alaric said, his voice resonating with authority. "The citadel will no longer be a place of darkness and despair. It will be a sanctuary, a place of healing, a place of new beginnings." The hunters hesitated, unsure what to do, what to believe. They had been trained to hate werewolves, to fear them, to hunt them. But now they were faced with a reality that challenged everything they had ever known. Suddenly, a voice, familiar and unexpected, broke the silence. "They speak the truth." Serafina stepped forward, her gray eyes filled with a mixture of relief and pride. She had removed her hunter's garb, revealing a simple, elegant dress beneath. She looked different.
Softer.
More human. "The council has been corrupt for centuries," she said, her voice addressing the hunters. "They have twisted the ancient laws, the sacred traditions, for their own selfish purposes. They have betrayed us all." She turned to Briar and Alaric, her gaze filled with respect. "You have shown us the true meaning of courage, of sacrifice, of love," she said. "You have freed us. From the curse. From the council. From ourselves." The hunters, hearing Serafina's words, seeing the truth in her eyes, began to murmur among themselves. They had trusted her, respected her, followed her. And now she was asking them to trust a werewolf, and a woman who had somehow merged with him. It was a difficult choice, a leap of faith. But they had seen the power of the bond, the defeat of the master, the end of the Crimson Moon curse. They had seen hope. Slowly, one by one, the hunters lowered their weapons completely, kneeling before Briar and Alaric, a gesture of submission, of acceptance. The betrayal was not theirs. It was the council's. And now the council was no more. Briar and Alaric looked at each other, their golden eyes shining with a shared understanding, a shared purpose. The battle was won. The curse was broken. But the journey was just beginning. They had to rebuild Eldoria, the lost kingdom. They had to heal the wounds of the past, the divisions between humans and werewolves. They had to create a new future, a future based on trust, on understanding, on love. They stepped down from the altar, their hands intertwined, their bodies still radiating a faint golden glow. They walked towards the hunters, towards Seraphina, towards the open doorway that led out of the citadel, out into the world. The night sky was filled with stars now, the full, silver moon behind them. As they walked, hand in hand, Briar felt a twinge of something, a flicker of separation, a sense of individuality returning. The merging was not permanent. It was temporary, a means to an end. But the bond remained, stronger than ever. She looked at Alaric, and he looked at her, their eyes meeting in a gaze of understanding, of love. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged victorious. But they had more to do. They paused at the doorway, both of them turning back to address the hunters and Seraphina. "Tomorrow," Alaric said, the words clear and strong, filled with purpose. "We begin." Briar finished, her voice blending into a soft, gentle echo of his. Anew. Chapter 14. The River of Tears and Regret. The dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of soft pink and gold, a stark contrast to the bloody crimson of the previous night. Briar and Alaric stood on the battlements of the citadel, overlooking the sprawling landscape that stretched out before them, the rolling hills, the verdant forests, the distant, shimmering ribbon of a river. They had separated, their individual forms restored, but the bond between them remained, a palpable connection that resonated in their shared gaze, in the way their hands instinctively sought each other's. They were two souls, distinct yet intertwined, forever marked by the merging, by the shared sacrifice, by the love that had blossomed in the crucible of danger and despair. The hunters, once their enemies, now stood with them, their faces etched with a mixture of awe, relief, and uncertainty. Seraphina, her gray eyes filled with a newfound hope, stood beside Briar, a silent testament to the transformation that had taken place within the walls of the citadel.
"What now?"
Seraphina asked, her voice soft, her gaze sweeping across the landscape. "The council is gone. The curse is broken. But the damage remains. The wounds run deep." Briar nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the task ahead. The Crimson Moon curse had been lifted, but the centuries of hatred, of fear, of violence, could not be erased overnight. The trust between humans and werewolves had been shattered, the kingdom of Eldoria reduced to ruins, its legacy tainted by sorrow and loss. "We rebuild," Alaric said, his voice firm and resolute, his golden eyes fixed on the horizon. "We heal. We remember." He turned to the hunters, his gaze encompassing them all. "The citadel will no longer be a prison," he said. "It will be a place of learning, a place of understanding, a place where humans and werewolves can come together to learn from the past, to build a better future." He paused, his gaze softening. "I know this will not be easy," he continued. "There will be resistance, there will be doubt, there will be fear. But we must persevere. We must show them a different way. A way of peace, of cooperation, of love." The hunters murmured among themselves, their faces reflecting a mixture of hope and apprehension. They had been raised on a diet of hatred and fear, taught to view werewolves as monsters, as creatures to be exterminated. It would take time, effort, and courage to change their minds, to heal their hearts. Briar stepped forward, her hand resting on Alaric's arm, a gesture of support, of unity. "We will do this together," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Humans and werewolves side by side. We will rebuild Eldoria, not as it was, but as it should be. A place of harmony, of balance, of justice." She turned to Seraphina, her gaze filled with gratitude and respect.
"You have been a true friend," she said. "A true ally.
Your courage, your wisdom, your compassion have helped us more than you know." Seraphina smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her features, chasing away the shadows of the past. "I did what I believed was right," she said. "I followed my heart, even when it led me down a path I never expected." She paused, her gaze drifting towards the river that snaked its way through the landscape. "There is a place," she said, "a place of significance, a place of sorrow. The river of tears and regret. It is where Lyra died." Alaric's body tensed, his golden eyes clouding with pain. The mention of Lyra, his lost love, brought back the memories of that fateful night, the night the curse had been laid upon him, the night his world had been shattered. Briar felt his pain, a sharp, agonizing pang that resonated within her own heart. The bond between them allowed her to share his emotions, his memories, his grief. "We should go there," Briar said, her voice soft, her hand tightening on his arm. "We should honor her memory. We should face the past. Together." Alaric hesitated, his gaze fixed on the distant river, his expression unreadable.
He knew she was right.
He had to face his past, his grief, his loss. He had to let go. "Very well," he said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We will go. To the river of tears and regret." They descended from the battlements, leaving the hunters to begin the arduous task of dismantling the council's legacy, of transforming the citadel into a place of hope and healing. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing on the stone pathways, their thoughts consumed by the journey ahead. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a reminder of the natural world that lay beyond the walls of the citadel, a world that was waiting to be healed, to be reborn. As they approached the river, the landscape changed. The trees grew taller, their branches gnarled and twisted, their leaves a dark, somber green. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable sense of sadness, of despair. The river itself was not what Briar had expected. It was not a raging torrent, but a slow, meandering stream, its waters dark and murky, its banks lined with weeping willows, their branches trailing in the water like tears. This was the place where Lyra had died, the place where Alaric's heart had been broken, the place where the curse had taken root. Briar looked to Alaric to see what he needed. She placed a hand on his chest, right above his heart. "We're here," she said. "Together." Chapter 15. The Heart of the Hollow King. Alaric stood on the bank of the river of tears and regret, his gaze fixed on the slow-moving water, his heart heavy with the weight of memories. The air was thick with sorrow, with the echoes of a past that refused to stay silent. He could almost see her, Lyra, her vibrant smile, her sparkling eyes, her long, flowing hair the color of raven's wings. He could almost feel her touch, her warmth, her love. Briar stood beside him, her hand still resting on his chest, a silent anchor in the storm of his emotions. She felt his pain, his grief, his regret, as if it were her own, a testament to the enduring strength of their bond. She loved this place, Alaric said, his voice hoarse, his throat tight with emotion. She used to come here to think, to dream, to escape the burdens of her royal duties. He paused, his gaze drifting towards a cluster of weeping willows, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering secrets to the water. She believed that the river held the tears of all those who had suffered, all those who had lost, all those who had regretted, he continued. She believed that it had healing powers, that it could wash away the pain, the sorrow, the guilt. He turned to Briar, his golden eyes searching hers, seeking solace, seeking understanding. I brought her here that night, he said. I wanted to show her something beautiful, something magical. I wanted to propose to her. He closed his eyes, his body trembling with the force of his emotions. He could still see it, the scene unfolding before him, as vivid and painful as if it were happening all over again. The crimson moon hanging low in the sky, casting a bloody glow over the landscape. The sorceress, her face contorted with hatred and vengeance, her hands raised, unleashing her dark magic. The screams, the chaos, the destruction. Lyra falling, her body broken, her life extinguished. It was my fault, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I should have protected her. I should have seen it coming. Briar tightened her grip on his chest, her fingers digging into his flesh, as if she could somehow absorb his pain, take it away from him. It wasn't your fault, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. You couldn't have known. You couldn't have stopped it. It was the curse. The sorceress's hatred. The darkness. Alaric shook his head, his eyes filled with tears.
But I failed her, he said.
I failed them all. My people, my kingdom, my love. He sank to his knees, his body racked with sobs, his grief pouring out of him like a torrent, a river of tears and regret. Briar knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him, holding him close, offering him the comfort, the support, the love that he so desperately needed. You didn't fail them, she said, her voice soft, her tears mingling with his.
You survived.
You endured. You found a way to break the curse. You found me. Alaric looked up at her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and something else. Something that looked like hope. You saved me, he said, his voice hoarse. You gave me back my life. You showed me that love can still exist, even in the darkest of times. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his fingers tracing the contours of her face. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the woman she was, but the soul she possessed, the soul that was now intertwined with his. I love you, Briar, he said, his voice filled with a sincerity, a depth of emotion, that took her breath away. I love you more than words can say. Briar's heart swelled with emotion, her eyes filling with tears of joy, of relief, of love. She had never expected to feel this way again, after losing Thomas, after believing that her heart was forever closed to love. But Alaric, he had opened it up again. He had shown her that life, even in the face of loss and sorrow, could still hold beauty, could still hold hope. I love you too, Alaric, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I love you more than anything. They embraced, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating as one. They stayed there, on the bank of the river of tears and regret, for a long time, holding each other, sharing their grief, their love, their hope. The river flowed on, its waters dark and murky, but now they seemed to carry a different energy. Not just sorrow, not just regret, but healing, forgiveness, acceptance. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the landscape, Alaric stood up, his hand still intertwined with Briar's. It's time, he said, his voice firm and resolute. It's time to let go. It's time to move on. He looked at the river, his gaze filled with a newfound peace, a newfound understanding. He had faced his past, his grief, his regret. He had forgiven himself. He turned to Briar, his golden eyes shining with love and gratitude. Thank you, he said, for everything. He leaned down and kissed her, a long, slow, passionate kiss that sealed their bond, their love, their future. He took a deep breath, turned back to face the water. He stepped forward, towards the river's edge. Lyra, Alaric called out, and then a pause, as he looked to Briar with a nod of confidence. I release you. And with those words, a soft, gentle golden light rose from the water, taking a faint, human-like form, and faded into the sky. Alaric was no longer the Hollow King. He was just Alaric.
And he was free.
Chapter 16. The Siege of Eventide Manor. The journey back to Eventide Manor was filled with a quiet, contemplative peace. Alaric and Briar walked hand in hand, their steps lighter, their hearts filled with a sense of hope and renewal. The release of Lyra's spirit, the acceptance of the past, had lifted a weight from Alaric's soul, allowing him to finally embrace the future, to embrace the love he shared with Briar. As they approached the manor, however, the peaceful atmosphere abruptly shattered. The air grew thick with tension, with the acrid scent of smoke, with the sounds of conflict. Something's wrong, Alaric said, his voice sharp, his golden eyes scanning the surroundings. I can feel it. Briar felt it too, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. The sense of unease, of foreboding, that had plagued her since she first arrived at Eventide had returned, stronger than ever. They quickened their pace, their steps echoing on the overgrown driveway. As they rounded the final bend, they saw it. Eventide Manor was under siege. Figures clad in black, similar to the hunter's attire, but with a different insignia, a serpent coiled around a sword swarmed the grounds, attacking the manor with a ferocity that was both terrifying and organized. They were not hunters. They were something else.
Who are they?
Briar asked, her voice trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. The serpent's coil, Alaric said, his voice grim, his jaw tight with anger. An ancient order, even older than the Hunters' Council. They are fanatics, obsessed with power, with purity. They believe that werewolves are an abomination, a corruption of the natural order. They seek to eradicate us.
Completely.
He paused, his gaze sweeping across the scene of chaos, his eyes narrowing. But this is not their usual tactic, he continued. They prefer to work in the shadows, to use stealth and deception. This is a full-scale assault. Something has changed. Briar felt a surge of fear, not just for herself, but for Alaric, for the hunters who had pledged their loyalty to them, for the future they had so desperately fought for. What do we do? She asked, her voice urgent. Alaric's eyes flashed, his golden glow intensifying. He released her hand, his body tensing, preparing for battle. We fight, he said. We protect what is ours. We defend Eventide. He turned to her, his gaze softening.
Stay close to me, he said.
And be careful. These are not ordinary enemies. He didn't wait for her response. He charged forward, his movements swift and graceful, his body transforming, his bones cracking, his muscles rippling, his skin sprouting fur. He became the wolf, but not the tormented, cursed creature of the past. He was different, stronger, more controlled. Briar followed him, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. She had no weapons, no fighting skills, but she had courage. She had love. And she had the bond. She felt a surge of power, a connection to Alaric, a sharing of strength, of agility, of senses. She could see more clearly, hear more acutely, smell more distinctly. She was connected to him, to his wolf form, to his power. They fought together, a seamless blend of human and werewolf, of magic and resilience. Alaric, in his wolf form, tore through the ranks of the serpent's coil, his claws and fangs ripping and tearing, his golden eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. Briar, drawing on the strength of their bond, moved with a speed and agility she hadn't known she possessed. She used her knowledge of the manor, of its hidden passages, its secret rooms, to outmaneuver the attackers, to lead them into traps, to disrupt their assault. The battle raged, a chaotic dance of shadows and light, of steel and claw, of magic and determination. The grounds of Eventide Manor became a battlefield, a scene of violence and destruction. Briar saw Seraphina, fighting alongside the other hunters, her movements swift and deadly, her gray eyes filled with a fierce determination. She was protecting her new home, her new family, her new purpose. But the serpent's coil were relentless. They kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless, their fanaticism fueling their attacks. They were driven by a hatred, a belief, that was both terrifying and unyielding. As the battle reached its climax, Briar found herself separated from Alaric, surrounded by a group of serpent's coil attackers. They closed in on her, their weapons raised, their faces contorted with hatred and contempt. She knew she was in danger, that she was outmatched, that she might not survive. But she refused to give up. She refused to yield. She would fight, to her last breath, for Alaric, for Eventide, for the future they had dreamed of. Suddenly, a figure appeared, stepping between her and the attackers. A figure clad in black, but with a different bearing, a different aura. It was Seraphina. "Leave her alone," Seraphina said, her voice cold and hard, her gray eyes blazing with defiance. "She is under my protection." The attackers hesitated, their eyes flickering to Seraphina's face, recognizing her, respecting her, fearing her. "She is with the wolf," one of them said, his voice filled with disgust. "She is tainted." "She is my friend," Seraphina said, her voice unwavering. "And I will not let you harm her." She drew her sword, its blade glinting in the fading light. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice ringing out with authority. "Or face my wrath." The attackers hesitated again, their resolve wavering. They knew Seraphina's reputation, her skill, her ruthlessness. They knew that challenging her was a dangerous proposition. Suddenly, a voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the air. "Seraphina, what is the meaning of this?" A tall, imposing figure, clad in the same black attire as the other attackers, but with a more elaborate insignia, a serpent coiled around a skull, stepped forward. He was the leader of this particular group, a man of obvious power and authority. Seraphina turned, a small detail Briar noticed. She was shaking. "They attacked," she said. "They are destroying everything." "They are doing what is necessary," he responded. He looked down to Briar, his eyes filled with disgust. "We must cleanse the land, Seraphina. Remove all taint. You know this." "We are not animals," she said, but he wasn't listening. He pointed his sword towards Briar. "Kill her." Seraphina didn't move. "I said kill her," he roared. "Or you're next." Seraphina hesitated, her entire frame shaking now. The battle still raged. It was chaos all around them. Briar looked up to her and mouthed, "Run." Seraphina's response was swift. She turned, but not to run. She drove her blade straight through the leader's chest. Chapter 17. The Choice Between Worlds. The leader of the Serpent's Coil detachment crumpled to the ground, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief, his lifeblood staining the earth. Seraphina stood over him, her sword dripping, her body trembling, her face a mask of conflicting emotions, defiance, grief, and liberation. The other members of the Serpent's Coil, witnessing the death of their leader, froze, their attack faltering. They looked at Seraphina, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear, confusion, and betrayal. "He was corrupt," Seraphina said, her voice shaking, her gaze sweeping across their faces. "He was a fanatic. He had lost his way." She raised her sword, its blade still stained with blood. "The Serpent's Coil is no more," she declared, her voice gaining strength, ringing out through the chaos of the battle. We will forge a new path. A path of reason. A path of balance." Some of the Serpent's Coil members hesitated, their loyalty to their fallen leader warring with the shock of his death, with the truth of Seraphina's words. Others, however, lowered their weapons, their faces reflecting a sense of relief. They, too, had grown weary of the endless violence, the senseless hatred, the fanaticism. The tide of the battle began to turn. The hunters, emboldened by Seraphina's actions, by the disarray within the ranks of the Serpent's Coil, pressed their attack with renewed vigor. Alaric, in his wolf form, tore through the remaining attackers, his golden eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. Briar, drawing on the strength of their bond, fought alongside them, her movements swift and agile, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. The battle was brutal, bloody, but it was also decisive. The Serpent's Coil, their leadership shattered, their ranks divided, were routed. They fled, disappearing into the night, leaving behind the wreckage of their failed assault. Eventide Manor still stood, battered but not broken, a testament to the courage and resilience of those who had defended it. The grounds were littered with the bodies of the fallen, a grim reminder of the cost of the conflict. As the dust settled, as the sounds of battle faded, a profound silence descended upon the manor. The survivors gathered in the courtyard, their faces etched with exhaustion, grief, and a flicker of hope. Alaric, his wolf form receding, his human form returning, stood beside Briar, his hand gripping hers tightly. He looked at Seraphina, his golden eyes filled with gratitude and respect. "You saved us," he said, his voice hoarse. You risked everything." Seraphina nodded, her gray eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "It was the right thing to do," she said. "The only thing to do." She looked at the remaining members of the Serpent's Coil, those who had chosen to lay down their arms, to follow her lead. We will rebuild," she said. "We will create a new order, an order based on balance. An order that respects all life." The former members of the Serpent's Coil murmured their assent, their faces reflecting a sense of hope. They had been freed from the shackles of fanaticism, given a chance to forge a new path, a new identity. The immediate crisis was over, but the future remained uncertain. The serpent's coil, though defeated, was not destroyed. They would likely regroup, retaliate, seek revenge. And there were other threats, other challenges that lay ahead. Briar felt a pang of something, a sense of displacement. She was a historian, a scholar, a woman from another time, another world. She had been drawn into this conflict, this world of magic and werewolves, by a twist of fate, by a bond that had connected her to Alaric, to his destiny. But now the curse was broken. The immediate danger was past. She had a choice to make. Stay here, in this world of magic and conflict, with Alaric, with the new life she had found, or return to her own world, to her own time, to the familiar comfort of her books, her research, her memories. She looked at Alaric, her heart aching with the weight of her decision. She loved him, more than anything. But she also missed her own world, her own life. She felt torn. Alaric felt her turmoil, her uncertainty, through the bond that connected them. He turned to her, his golden eyes searching hers, seeking understanding. "You're thinking of leaving," he said, his voice soft, his expression unreadable. Briar nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know what to do," she said. "I love you, Alaric. But I also miss my own world. My own life." Alaric's expression changed, not to one of anger or rejection, but of understanding. He took her hands in his touch gentle, reassuring.
"I know," he said.
"I feel it too. The pull of your own time. The longing for what you've lost." He paused, his gaze intense.
"You don't have to stay," he said.
You have fulfilled your purpose here.
You have saved me.
You have saved us all." He smiled, a sad, fleeting smile. "Go back to your world, Briar," he said. "Live your life. Be happy. And remember me." Briar's tears flowed freely now, tears of sorrow, of gratitude, of love. She knew he was right.
She had a choice to make.
And she had to make it. For herself. For him. I will never forget you, Alaric," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I will always love you." She leaned in and kissed him, a long, slow, passionate kiss that sealed their bond, their love, their farewell. She stepped back, her heart aching, her body trembling. She looked at him, one last time, memorizing his features, his golden eyes, his smile. "Goodbye, Alaric," she whispered. And then, she turned and walked away, towards the manor, towards the library, towards the place where it had all begun. The place where she had found the book, the key, the portal that had brought her here. She knew, somehow, that she would find a way back. Back to her own world, her own time, back to herself. She stepped inside, looking back one last time. Alaric was still there, watching her. She knew what she needed to do, and entered the library. Chapter 18. The Unraveling of the Past. The library of Eventide Manor was silent, still, filled with the scent of old books, of parchment and leather, of magic. Briar walked slowly through the familiar aisles, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floor, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She had chosen to return to her own world, to her own time. It was a difficult choice, a painful choice, but it was the right choice. She had fulfilled her purpose here, helped Alaric break the curse, helped to forge a new path for humans and werewolves. She had found love, and she had lost it, but she had also found something else. Something within herself. Strength, courage, resilience. A sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. She was no longer just a historian, a scholar, a widow. She was a warrior, a protector, a woman who had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. She reached the bookshelf where she had found the book about the Hollow Prince, the book that had started it all. The book that had drawn her into this world of magic and werewolves, of curses and soul bonds. She ran her fingers along the spines of the ancient tomes, searching for the one that had called to her, the one that had changed her life forever. And then she saw it. The book bound in dark, almost black leather, with a single silver symbol embossed on the cover, a crescent moon entwined with a wolf's head. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the book, her heart pounding in her chest. Was this the key? Was this the way back? She remembered Isolde's cryptic note. Eventide holds the answers you seek. But be warned, Briar, some doors are best left unopened. She had opened the door. She had entered this world. And now she was ready to close it. She took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. She pulled the book from the shelf, its weight familiar in her hands. She opened it carefully, her fingers tracing the strange, shifting script. The words, as before, rearranged themselves into English, revealing a passage she hadn't seen before, a passage that seemed to be addressed to her. You have come far, Briarvex, it read. You have faced the darkness. You have broken the curse. You have found love. And now you have a choice to make. Stay or return. Choose wisely, for the path you take will shape not only your destiny, but the destiny of two worlds. Briar closed her eyes, her mind reeling. Two worlds. The world of magic and werewolves, and the world of her own time. She thought of Alaric, of his golden eyes, of his strength, of his love. She thought of Seraphina, of the hunters, of the new path they were forging, of the hope they had found. She thought of her own world, of her quiet life, of her books, of her research, of her memories. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the book, on the words that seemed to shimmer and shift before her. She knew what she had to do. She closed the book, her fingers tightening around its cover. She held it close to her heart, a tangible link to the world she was leaving behind, to the love she had found, to the magic she had experienced. She turned and walked towards the center of the library, towards the large, circular table where she had first read the book, where she had first felt the pull of this world, the connection to Alaric. She placed the book on the table, its silver symbol gleaming in the soft light that filtered through the windows. She stood there for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the library, taking in the familiar sights, the comforting scents, the memories. And then, she spoke, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a power she hadn't known she possessed. I choose to return, she said, to my own world,
To my own time.
to myself. The words hung in the air, heavy with significance, with finality. The library seemed to hold its breath, waiting, listening. And then something shifted. The air grew thick, charged with energy. The symbols on the book began to glow, to pulse with a soft, silver light. The floor beneath her feet began to tremble, to vibrate. Briar felt a sensation of pulling. A force, gentle but irresistible, drawing her somewhere. She closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She trusted the magic, trusted the bond, trusted herself. She let go. She felt a sensation of falling, of spinning, of traveling, through time, through space, through worlds. And then silence. She opened her eyes. She was standing in the same library, in Eventide Manor. But something was different. The air was lighter. The light was brighter. The scent of old books was still there, but it was overlaid with something else. The scent of fresh air, of life. She looked around, her gaze sweeping across the room. The books were still there, the furniture, the everything. But it was different. Cleaner. Brighter. More lived in. She heard a sound, a familiar sound, coming from the doorway. Footsteps. She turned, her heart leaping into her throat. Standing in the doorway was a woman. A woman she recognized, a woman she had never met, but a woman she knew. Isolde. But younger. Vibrant.
Alive.
Isolde smiled, her eyes sparkling with warmth and recognition. Welcome back, Briar, she said. I've been expecting you. Briar gasped. But you're... Isolde laughed, a melodic sound. Alive? Yes. I am. You did that, my dear. She paused, her eyes filled with understanding. You changed things, Briar. You unraveled the past. You set us all free. Briar was home. Chapter 19. The Reunion of Shattered Souls. Briar stared at Isolde, her mind struggling to comprehend the impossible reality before her. Isolde, her great-aunt, the woman she had known only through whispers and faded photographs, was alive, vibrant, standing before her in the library of Eventide Manor. "I don't understand," Briar stammered, her voice trembling. How is this possible?" Isolde smiled, a warm, knowing smile that radiated a sense of peace and understanding. "You changed the past, Briar," she said. "You broke the curse. You healed the rift between humans and werewolves. You altered the course of history." She stepped closer, her eyes filled with gratitude and affection. "The Crimson Moon curse," she explained, "it didn't just affect Alaric. It rippled through time, affecting all those connected to him, to his lineage, to Eventide." She paused, her gaze drifting towards a window, towards the sunlit garden beyond. "My death," she continued, "was a consequence of that curse. A ripple effect.
But you stopped it.
You rewrote the story." Briar felt a wave of relief.
Of joy.
She had not only saved Alaric, she had saved Isolde. She had changed the past for the better. "But how?" Briar asked, her voice still filled with wonder. "How did I change things?" "The merging," Isolde said. "The union of your soul with Alaric's. It released a surge of power, a wave of energy that rippled backwards through time, undoing the damage, healing the wounds, altering the timeline." She paused, her gaze intense. "It was a dangerous act, Briar," she said. "A selfless act. You risked everything. For him. For us." Briar felt a blush rise to her cheeks. She hadn't thought of it as selfless. She had done what she had to do, what her heart had told her to do. She had followed her love. "I just wanted to help him," Briar said, her voice soft. I loved him." Isolde nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know," she said. "And he loved you too. More than words can say." She reached out and took Briar's hands, her touch warm and reassuring. He's in a different world now, Briar," she said. "A different time. But the bond remains. The connection is still there." Briar felt a pang of longing, of loss. She knew she couldn't go back. She had made her choice. But she would never forget him. She would always love him. I know," Briar said, her voice choked with emotion. "And I will always remember him."
Isolde smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "He will remember you too," she said. "And he will be waiting for you.
In another life, another time, another world." She paused, her gaze shifting towards the book on the table, the book with the silver symbol of the crescent moon and the wolf's head. "That book," she said, "is a gateway, a portal between worlds, between times. It brought you here, and it can take you back, if you ever choose to return." Briar looked at the book, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She had made her choice for now, but the future was uncertain, the possibilities endless. "For now," Isolde said, interrupting her thoughts, "you are home, you are safe, and you are loved." She embraced Briar, a warm, comforting embrace that filled her with a sense of belonging, a sense of family. "Come," Isolde said, releasing her from the embrace. "Let me show you around. Eventide has changed, and so have I." She led Briar out of the library, into the sunlit halls of the manor. The house was different. It was no longer the gloomy, Gothic mausoleum she had first encountered. It was alive. The dust and decay were gone, replaced by warmth and light. The furniture was polished, the floors were gleaming, the windows were open, allowing the fresh air and sunshine to stream in. The air was filled with the scent of flowers, of baking bread, of life. Isolde showed her the garden, now a riot of color and fragrance, the roses blooming in vibrant hues, the herbs thriving in neat, well-tended beds. She showed her the drawing room, now filled with music and laughter, the piano no longer silent, but played by Isolde herself, her fingers dancing across the ivory keys. She showed her the rest of the house, each room a testament to the transformation that had taken place, to the life that had returned to Eventide. As they walked, Isolde told Briar about her life, about her experiences, about the world she lived in. It was a world where magic was real, where werewolves existed, but it was also a world where humans and werewolves lived in harmony, where the ancient hatreds and fears had been overcome. It was a world that Briar had helped to create. In the evening, they sat together in the drawing room, sharing a meal, sharing stories, sharing laughter. Briar felt a sense of peace, of contentment. She was home. She was with family. She was happy. But she also felt a sense of longing, a yearning for something more, for someone more. She thought of Alaric, of his golden eyes, of his strength, of his love. She thought of the bond they shared, the connection that transcended time and space, the promise of a future reunion. She glanced towards the library, towards the book. She knew, somehow, that her journey was not over, that her story was still being written, that one day she would see him again. For now, though, she smiled across the table, happy and content. "It's good to be home," she told Isolde. Isolde nodded and grinned back.
"It is," she said. "It truly is."
Briar was home, and she had all the time in the world. Chapter 20. The Final Confrontation of Hearts. Years passed. Briar settled into her life at Eventide Manor, her days filled with the familiar comforts of books, research, and the newfound joy of a loving family. She and Isolde grew close, their bond strengthening with each passing day, their conversations ranging from the mundane to the magical, from the history of Eventide to the mysteries of a universe. Briar learned more about Isolde's life, about her knowledge of magic, about her connection to the world of werewolves, about her friendship with Alaric's ancestors. She discovered that Isolde was not just a recluse, not just an eccentric, but a powerful witch, a guardian of ancient knowledge, a protector of the balance between worlds. Briar also delved deeper into her own research, her own studies, her own magic. She discovered that she, too, possessed a spark of magic, a latent ability that had been awakened by her connection to Alaric, by her journey through time, by her merging of souls. She learned to control her magic, to harness its power, to use it for good. She helped Isolde with her work, with her potions, with her spells, with her protection of Eventide. But she never forgot Alaric. His memory remained vivid, a constant presence in her heart, a reminder of the love she had found, the sacrifice she had made, the future that awaited her. She often found herself drawn to the library, to the book with the silver symbol, to the gateway between worlds. She would sit there for hours, reading, thinking, dreaming of him. She knew that she could go back. She could use the book, travel through time, reunite with Alaric. But she hesitated. She was happy here, at Eventide with Isolde. She had a life, a purpose, a family, and she was afraid. Afraid of the dangers she might face, afraid of the changes she might encounter, afraid of disrupting the balance she had helped to create. But the longing remained, the yearning for something more, for someone more. One evening, as she sat in the library, reading by the soft glow of a lamp, she heard a sound. A familiar sound.
A howl.
It was not the howl of a tormented beast, not the howl of a cursed creature. It was different, stronger, more controlled. It was Alaric's howl. Briar's heart leaped into her throat. She stood up, her body trembling, her senses on high alert. She knew, somehow, that he was calling to her. Across time, across space, across worlds. She looked at the book, the silver symbol gleaming in the lamplight. She knew what she had to do. She had waited long enough. She had hesitated long enough. She had lived long enough.
It was time.
She walked towards the table, her steps firm and resolute, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and excitement. She reached out and touched the book, her fingers tracing the familiar symbol of the crescent moon and the wolf's head. She closed her eyes, focusing all her will, all her energy, all her love on Alaric. She spoke, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a power that had grown within her over the years. "I choose to return," she said.
To him.
"To our future." The words hung in the air, heavy with significance, with destiny. The library seemed to hold its breath, waiting, listening. And then it happened. The air grew thick, charged with energy. The symbols on the book began to glow, to pulse with a brilliant, golden light. The floor beneath her feet began to tremble, to vibrate. Briar felt a sensation of pulling, a force no longer gentle, but powerful and irresistible, drawing her towards him. She opened her eyes, and they were golden. The same golden glow as Alaric's. The same golden glow that had united them, that had saved them, that had changed them. She smiled, a radiant smile filled with love and anticipation. She let go. She felt a sensation of falling, of spinning, of traveling, through time, through space, through worlds. And then silence. She opened her eyes. She was standing in a forest, a familiar forest, bathed in the soft, silvery light of the full moon. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth of werewolves. She heard a sound, a familiar sound close by. Footsteps. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing before her was Alaric. He was older, his features more defined, his hair streaked with silver, but his eyes were the same. Golden, intense, filled with love. He smiled, a radiant smile that lit up his features, chasing away the shadows of the past, revealing the strength, the courage, the beauty that had captivated her all those years ago. "Welcome back, Briar," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur that sent shivers down her spine. "I've been waiting for you." Briar rushed towards him, her arms outstretched, her heart overflowing with joy. They embraced, their bodies clinging together, their hearts beating as one. It was a reunion of shattered souls, a culmination of a love that had transcended time and space, a beginning of a new chapter. "I love you, Alaric," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "And I love you, Briar," he said, his voice filled with a depth of feeling that took her breath away. Forever and always. They stood there, in the moonlit forest, their arms wrapped around each other, their hearts united, their souls intertwined. They were together, at last. And their future was finally theirs. It stretched out before them, infinite. Briar closed her eyes and smiled. Epilogue. The years that followed were a tapestry woven with threads of joy, challenge, and an enduring love that defied the boundaries of time and space. Briar and Alaric, reunited, embarked on a journey to rebuild Eldoria, not as a kingdom of the past, but as a beacon of hope for the future. Eventide Manor, once a symbol of isolation and sorrow, became a haven of unity, a place where humans and werewolves lived side by side, their differences celebrated, their strengths combined. Serafina, her heart healed and her spirit renewed, became a trusted advisor and friend, her wisdom and courage invaluable in navigating the complexities of their intertwined society. The hunters, once sworn enemies of werewolves, gradually shed their prejudices, their fear replaced by understanding and respect. They learned to live alongside the creatures they had once hunted, discovering a shared connection to the land, a shared responsibility for its protection. Briar, drawing on her knowledge of history and her innate magic, helped to bridge the gap between the two cultures, fostering communication, understanding, and trust. She became a teacher, a mentor, a bridge between worlds. Alaric, freed from the curse, embraced his role as a leader, his strength tempered by compassion, his wisdom guided by love. He ruled not with an iron fist, but with an open heart, his decisions always guided by the well-being of his people, both human and werewolf. They faced challenges, of course. There were those who clung to the old ways, who resisted change, who sought to sow discord and division. But Briar and Alaric, united by their love and their shared vision, met those challenges head-on, their bond a source of unwavering strength. They traveled throughout Eldoria, visiting villages and towns, listening to the concerns of their people, offering guidance and support, fostering a sense of community, of belonging. They established schools, hospitals, and centers of learning, promoting education, healthcare, and understanding. They also explored the mysteries of Eventide Manor, delving deeper into its hidden passages, its secret chambers, its magic. They discovered ancient texts, forgotten spells, and the truth about Isolde's connection to Alaric's lineage. They learned that Isolde had been more than just a guardian of Eventide. She had been a protector of the balance between worlds, a key figure in a long and intricate dance between humans, werewolves, and magic. And they discovered that Briar's arrival, her journey through time, had not been an accident, but a destiny. A destiny woven into the fabric of Eventide, into the history of Eldoria, into the very essence of their love. As the years turned into decades, Briar and Alaric's love deepened, their bond strengthening with each passing moment. They shared laughter and tears, triumphs and setbacks, joys and sorrows. They lived a life filled with purpose, with meaning, with love. They never forgot the past, the sacrifices that had been made, the lessons that had been learned. But they also embraced the future, their eyes always fixed on the horizon, on the promise of a better world, a world where humans and werewolves could live together in peace, in harmony, in love. One evening, as they stood on the battlements of Eventide Manor, overlooking the sprawling landscape bathed in the soft, golden light of the setting sun, Briar turned to Alaric, her eyes shining with love and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, her hand reaching out to touch his cheek. For everything." Alaric smiled, his golden eyes reflecting the warmth of the setting sun, the depth of his love for her. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur. For coming back to me." They embraced, their bodies close, their hearts beating as one. They stood there, silhouetted against the fiery sky, a testament to the enduring power of love, the transformative power of hope, to the infinite possibilities of the future. Their story, a story of shattered souls reunited, of curses broken, of worlds intertwined, was a story that would be told for generations to come. A story of love, of sacrifice, of magic. A story that would never end. Because love, like magic, was eternal. And their love was forever.